Welcome in, everybody, to the Bare Knuckle Recovery Podcast. I forgot what episode it is. Is it 13? Thank you, Noah. Episode 13.
13.
As always, I'm Tommy Streeter, along with Nate Mollering, and we have one of our favorite guests that we've had so far, Sergeant Gerardot, is back with us again today.
Thank you.
To discuss overcoming adversity with us and using, our pain and our struggles to try to help people who are going through similar situations today.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. I mean, almost everybody watching, I'm sure, has been through something hard in their lives.
Everybody's been through something hard in their lives.
Absolutely, they have. Well, and here's the thing. I think a lot of people go through tough times, go through adversity, things that cause what we would call trauma, so people PTSD, and those things often, I mean, they're hard to deal with, right? Like after the fact. But, one of the things, Tommy and I both have been through a lot with our substance use and our mental health issues over the years.
And our poor decision making.
Poor decision making, right. So some of it comes down to things we couldn't control, like having a predisposition to abusing substances, our brains not being wired properly, but a lot of it also came down to making poor decisions. And those poor decisions led to poor outcomes, for lack of a better term. It's somewhat of an understatement. When you go from, being homeless, destroying relationships with your families, being robbed, being beaten, in Tommy's case, being shot. These are all horrible things we went through, right? And what a lot of people do oftentimes with those things is they don't want to talk about it, partly because it's embarrassing, and also it brings up a lot of negative feelings. But why wouldn't we want to talk about them? Because we've made it through, and we're doing okay now. No, every day is a process. We're not perfect. It's a lifelong journey for everybody involved.
Well, I mean, let me just jump in real quick. One thing that I will say, and maybe you feel the same way, maybe not, but the first, 6 times that I went to treatment, when I would get out of treatment, like I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to completely move on. I wanted to forget about that part of my life, act like it never happened. And so that's what I tried to do. Yep. There was a few times where I had, I'd kind of get involved in like a 12-step program or an outpatient program. But outside of that, I wouldn't talk about it at all. I wanted to completely move on. My family probably did too. Yeah. Rightfully so. It's a little bit different for them. But even my mom now, you know what my mom does now. Mm-hmm. So she has used all of that to try to help people too. But the point of that is, I think a big part of that, like you said, is because I was embarrassed.
Right. You wanted to put it, so I was the same way. I wanted to put it all behind me. I never wanted to think about it again. But here's the problem. It's a part of who you are as a person. It's a part of your identity. It's a part of your story. Our lives are made up of stories. And how we tell those stories is very important. The problem probably was during that time where you're trying to repress it, not talk about it. In your story, you were probably the victim.
Absolutely.
People who tell their stories 100%. As victims, we know for a fact through research that they don't get better.
Yep.
It's when we own our part, we focus on what we can control, and we move forward, and we use that to help other people, right? Pain to purpose, basically. And so that's also why we have Sergeant Gerardot with us today. He's been with Device Narcotics for how many years?
It's now going on 19 years.
19 years Device Narcotics with Fort Wayne PD, and you were on the street for a long time too, right?
Correct. 7 years as a uniform operations officer.
And you were also in the military for a period of time?
13 years in the military.
13 years in the military. Okay.
So how old are you?
55.
Yeah, 55.
Well, you don't look like it, so you got that going for you.
Yeah,
thanks.
Right.
Probably like 53.
It's stress-free living. Yeah, my career is very stress-free and it's relaxing. So,
well,
sounds like it.
Here's what I would say, though. I mean, it's not stress-free, and this is another thing I want to talk about too. Is that the idea that life should be stress-free is just complete nonsense.
It is.
It's how you deal with your stress, I'm sure, is part of it. Correct. And part of that is how you tell your stories that have happened to you and around you throughout your life.
And how you talk to yourself.
100%. Self-talk is one of the biggest indicators whether somebody's going to be successful, whether they're going to overcome adversity, whether they're going to overcome trauma, all those things, right?
Correct.
So talk a little bit about, if you would, some of the things that went on that, bothered you as a police officer, as a human being, as a father, as a man of faith, and how you change that narrative to drive you forward, to try to be part of the solution and not just living in the problem.
Talk about putting you on the spot.
Oh, easy. So I've thought about this a lot. Like one of the things about me is I've always I've been super interested in human beings my entire life. Mm-hmm. I love psychology. And for better or worse. Sometimes I don't understand why humans do certain things. Of course, as a police officers, we see horrible things done to adults, to kids, to women, to elderly, things you just are hard to get your head wrapped around. Like, why would anybody ever do something so horrible to another human being? So early in my career, one of the places I worked was down in the southeast part of town, and I'm not going to name the complex, but there was a pretty well-known complex where there was a lot of gang violence, a lot of drug dealing, a lot of armed robberies within the complex. Basically, the people in the complex were being victimized by other people who lived in the complex. And it was kind of like its own like microcosm of society. So I got really interested in it. In fact, the first time I was ever shot at as a police officer, somebody tried to basically sniper me. I was standing on the police department's parking lot next to my squad car, and our police station backed right up at the time to this complex. So I was like, we got to do something about this. I mean, shoot, it's bad enough these people are putting up with this, but now they're shooting at the police. Something's got to be done. So I decided I would just start walking through the complex, sometimes by myself, sometimes with other people. And I started kind of engaging the gang guys. And I can remember, like, in my mind having a concept of who and what they were that turned out to be wrong. Like, a lot of times I'd go talk to them, and these were like really intelligent guys. And but I would see them generationally bringing up like their younger brothers into it. And I'll just tell the one story. It was really horrific, but there was two brothers. One of them, it was a younger kid. He started out at about 10. And I kept talking to the brother, like, hey, get your younger brother out of this. He's a sharp kid. He could go far. He could do good things in school. Like, he doesn't need this lifestyle of gangs and thugs and people getting shot all the time and dealing drugs in prison, right? So it went on and on and on. And I knew it was a process. It wasn't going to fix overnight, but I just keep talking to him all the time.
Yeah.
And one night we got called to a shooting. There used to be a place. It was an illegal liquor kind of bar. It was in a house downtown, not too far from this complex, and there were shots fired, and I pull up, and I'd been telling this older brother, like, get your brother out for something bad happens. So I pull up, people are running everywhere, and I look over, and this young man was sitting on an air conditioning unit next to one of the buildings. And I recognized him right away. I kind of looked at him, and I was like, something's not right, but let me deal with this other stuff first. So as it kind of calmed down, then I went over to talk to him. And I said his name, and I looked at him, and then it caught my attention. He had basically been shot in the head, and he was just slumped over, sitting up. It didn't knock him off of there, and he was dead. For me, like, super sad moment. Like, I'd been talking about this kid, trying to get this kid out, and I hated that my prediction had come true. So in the trauma of this, instead of like the brother maybe kind of getting it together, and again, it's like you said, it's choices.
It is.
I think he chose to double down on what he'd been doing.
Right.
And at some point that was his fate as well. So really seeing this trauma go on with these kids in these neighborhoods, I mean, it's hard to explain the kind of life they live. And not that I'm saying that the world they're not responsible for their own actions, but then again, there is a set of events that happen to them from an early age that's kind of programming their personality as they're growing up. And you were absolutely right, like how we internalize. And then I've had success stories where I talk to kids and they grew up in the exact same neighborhoods, and now they're lawyers and sports representatives and like they made it out.
Yeah. And some of them broke the cycle.
They broke it.
They were the cycle breaker, and now you can change that narrative for your family. And the same thing with people with substance use disorder. A lot of times when we deal with people, dad was a drinker, grandpa was a drinker, mom was a drinker, or drugs, whatever you want to do, replace it with whatever. And so they carry that on because that's their learned behavior. That's what they know, that's what they see. And so then there's that one person that comes along and says, you know what, I'm going to take these experiences and I'm going to use this. Yes, it was hard. Yes, it was traumatic, but I'm going to use this as fuel to do something different, to be the change, be the adult that I needed when I was a kid, right? Because what a lot of people do is they, like you said, they double down. They just say, well, all these bad things happened to me. I'm the victim. You know, my brother got killed. My dad drank himself to death. My mom died of an overdose, whatever it is. And they become part of the problem. Correct. They take that pain. And somebody told me this early on in recovery. They said, if you don't deal with your pain, you just spread it to everybody else. And so early on, what I was a sprinkler of pain. Just as you can imagine, the sprinklers that go around,
Yep.
and they spray everything that's close to them, right? And everybody else with these blades of grass just getting watered with pain, but it wasn't water. It was basically like battery acid, just killing everything around me, creating a desert, right? That was insufferable for everybody else. But then when we start to flip that narrative and we start to take responsibility for our part, because that's really all we can control at the end of the day, right?
That's it.
You couldn't control that kid getting shot. You can't control what his brother taught him or pushed him to do. Right. You can't control the fact that he chose to hang out by that illegal liquor place where there's probably shots fired all the time, right?
Right.
But what you could control was going over and say, hey, kid, I believe in you. You're smart. You don't need this crap. And telling his brother, hey, you can be the change maker in the family and get your brother out of here. Might be too late for you, but it's not too late for him.
Right.
You know, so you did what you could. You controlled what you can control. And I'm sure that moment probably pushed you on to try with other people, right?
Well, yeah, because what you find is there's always going to be this group of people that want to be victims.
Right.
And maintain that because it's easier. I think it's hard to like get outside of that victimhood.
It is.
And I don't blame them for that. Like, I'm not judging them in any way, shape, or form for that take on it. But there are, you and I have talked about this several times, and especially through this opiate epidemic, like how many people we know that die. Like I was just thinking of our girl the other day that we worked so hard on, and she ended up dying, and like how sad that was, how many times we'd saved her, and it just finally caught up to her. But then we have the success stories. So you don't know who it's going to be. You just have to work within your sphere of control, and you just got to keep trying.
Absolutely. That's
really at the end of the day what it means. Because once you see one person make it out, like again, we've said this several times. I mean, you and Tommy, for me, like once I saw you make it out, that was a huge shining light in my like, it was getting pretty dark for me. And it was like just seeing dead body after dead body after dead body, young, old, didn't matter. This drug did not care.
Right.
I'd never seen anything like this in my career as a narcotics detective till fentanyl. And it just takes that one to start bringing it all back. It's like a great leader. I've always, I'm big into leadership, and you can, in the military, I saw great leaders and horrible leaders with the same group of people. The people was low morale and awful. And then you get this one, and the one comes and the exact same people, all of a sudden, it's almost like magic. So you look for that one that's going to make it out. And that one is always worth it. Now we're moved on. Now we're 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 and it's 100. And like what you guys do is, to me, is amazing, just for the fact that like, you don't even know what you've done somewhere in their mind in some dark, dirty, nasty hotel.
Yeah.
Something clicks and they're like, you know what? They said this to me. And now all of a sudden I see the light and there's my path.
Absolutely.
And I think that we have to keep driving all the time for the path, and that it's some of our responsibility to help, but it's a huge part their responsibility.
Right.
And once we get that through to them, that you're in control of this, quit telling yourself that it doesn't. That's that self-talk.
We talk a lot about planting seeds, especially when you work with people that are in early recovery and even people in active addiction. And, you know, the best way I have to kind of, encapsulate that in a metaphor is basically, well, in a story, is with my recovery where, I went to treatment, 10 times, probably got sober 20. I was always seeking out these recovery gurus like IOP, therapists, the perfect fit. And people say, well, doesn't it suck you wasted all that time talking to those people, those programs didn't work? And don't they feel like they wasted all that time? I said, no, because every time that I was going to seek someone out and I found someone who had what I wanted, but I wasn't quite ready to take all the steps, I still picked up more information than I realized. Then when I finally got sober the last time, things started to click that they had said 20 times before, right? And then I never actually realized that I retained, but something would happen. I'd be like, oh, well, that's what that old guy was talking about 10 years ago, And the same thing happens with people that we work with, right? People you come across. Who knows, that kid that got shot in the head, you kept telling him good stuff, filling him up. That bullet was 6 inches the other direction. That might have been the moment. We'll never know, but you never know when that's going to click. And that's why it's so important for people that have touch points with the individuals who struggle to keep pouring into them and just keep reinforcing the same thing. Even if it seems like they're not listening or they respond with an F you might be the only person that's pouring into them that's actually telling them something positive every single day. And you don't know, you may never know how much that means to them. Like, we have people that come up to us who maybe they didn't leave like a treatment center on the best terms, or we sent them somewhere, never heard from them again. We assumed that they went back out or they died, and they'll come up to us at an event and say, hey, you don't remember this, but you sent me to treatment 2 years ago, or you helped me get into this place 2 years ago. I've been sober for 2 years because of you.
Yeah.
And we say, well, it wasn't because of me. Like, our job really is just to get people there, right? It's to fill them up with the information and take them to the spot where they can learn the tools. It's their job to pick up the tools and apply them. They do all the heavy lifting. We're just kind of we just give them a little push, right?
Right.
Show them the path, but they got to walk it. So you never know when that is going to take root. You never know when you're going to start to see that sprout back up.
Yeah, what's interesting when you say that, can you give them a little push? And I've had this theory on all of it, like all the bad things that I see and do, and the people who do bad things, and people who just get lost along the way.
Yeah.
It never starts with a handful of fentanyl.
No.
You're on a good path, and then slowly you get nudged a little bit, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. And I've always had this theory that if Satan ever had a tool, this fentanyl was it. And what I've noticed with it, and you've heard me speak on this too, to some schools, when you and I have done together, it doesn't have to be a shove off the path. I just got to keep bumping you a little bit till you're in the weeds. And next thing you know, you don't know where the path went. I feel like it's our job to start bumping them back towards the path that's going to get them on a good place in their life. That's how they get back to a good place in their life. Is I can't just grab you and drag you back up on the road.
No.
You got there by a series of 1,000 little bumps. I got to give you a bunch to get you back up on the road.
Yeah.
And again, it's how we, and for me also, like, how do I internalize all this stuff? And it's always looking for, I had to learn a long time ago, I have to keep looking for the good, even if they're little small pieces of it.
Right.
And what I've learned is there was actually a really good study that, marketing did, that's why news never tells you anything good, because it doesn't sell.
Right.
People gravitate towards the negative.
Absolutely.
So if I keep feeding you negative, you want it. There's something inherent in us that we focus on the bad. So when I talk to police officers and firefighters and first responders about how we deal with people who are overdosing a lot, or who were in your situation, we've talked about this burnout that, first responders get. I have to remind them that what we're doing today, you're not going to see results of. You don't know, is this the last time you Narcan them for the 50th time? Yeah, okay, you're getting kind of frustrated with this person. That's understandable. That's human nature.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that might have been the last time you ever have to Narcan them again.
Yeah.
And maybe if you said something to them while you were Narcaning them after they come out of it and they're conscious, maybe that would be the thing that gets them. And what does it cost you?
Right.
It cost you nothing. In fact, if I look for the good in it, I find that my personality is less dark, less depressing, because I keep focusing on that light, not the dark part of it. Because the light's in there, you just got to go dig it out.
Well, and that's what recovery is all about, is gratitude, right? I mean, because the reason we had you on too is, you've been through a lot. You have every reason in the world to be cynical. Cops, first responders, you guys, almost everybody you meet is on their worst day, right?
Right.
It's a rare occasion when you got to go do like coffee with a cop or whatever, and people shake your hand, say thank you for your service, and most people are like, screaming at you, saying F you or F the police, or throwing cups of coffee at your car, or
Trying to shoot you while you're standing outside the police station.
Yeah, little stuff like that.
Throwing rocks at you, or spitting in your burger at a fast food joint. So, you have every reason in the world to be cynical, and I've always been impressed by this. You're one of those people that's not, and you're one of those people too that, like, at times throughout my recovery, and I'm sure Tommy's recovery, and that's the thing. People think of like recovery as this linear line where it's like point A to point B, and it's like they also think of it as this destination. Are you thinking about my example on the board? And we'll have to show Gerardot that sometime. But anyway, people think about it as point A to point B, with point B being the destination where you get there. And then it's like in the movies, in the movies you see like an addict or an alcoholic, and they they go into rehab, kind of shuffle in, and they're and then all these people in white coats come out, and they're like, oh, come on, and they take them through these doors, and then it fast forwards a year later, and they got a clean haircut, and they got their their nice clothes on, their nice shoes, and they're sitting in an AA meeting, and they're ripping a good share, they're saying all the right stuff, and then everybody's clapping, and their life's great. They got their kids back, they got the car, they got the job back. That's not recovery. That's Hollywood's version of recovery. Just like Hollywood has their version of cops or doctors, when they're in the ER and there's never got blood on their scrubs or anything. You've got a general ER practitioner that's doing brain surgery all of a sudden on Grey's Anatomy, right? Like, they have all these like misconceptions about what life is, and they do the same thing with recovery.
Yeah,
recovery is not you make it through the threshold and you're good for the rest of your life. It's a bumpy ride. It's up, it's down, it's left, it's right. It's hard. And it's every single day. And there's going to be times when you're going to be feeling great because you're going to be in gratitude, which is a huge part of recovery, is being grateful for what you have and what's happened to you. And there's going to be a lot of times where you're pissed off and life sucks and you don't want to get out of bed and nothing you're doing is working and nobody's listening to you and you can't do anything right. That's okay. But that's why you got to surround yourself with people who can come remind you. And that's why it's also important to talk about it. And that's one of the things that we're getting at here is sharing those struggles you've been through and how you made it out. And everything's not always going to be sunshines and rainbows, but that's okay.
Right.
That's part of life. That's the beauty of life. Like, joy wouldn't feel so good if it wasn't for sadness.
I think that's another good thing about, like we're talking about, is continuing to talk about that stuff and share it with other people. Mm-hmm. It's also a really good reminder, because once again, one of the things that I would always do is, like, I would forget about how terrible my life was when I was in active addiction. I would forget how much that half-eaten cheeseburger out of the trash can at McDonald's sucked. The only thing that I could remember was how good it felt to put a needle in my arm and inject heroin. That was the only thing I could remember. So all the negative consequences, all that stuff, it disappears unless I continue to talk about it every day and journal about it, write about it. When I get those thoughts, write them down, because that's one thing. Like, I was really good at lying to myself, but if I'm writing down how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, I can go back and look at it later and, like, all right, that's not a lie because I wrote it down. So that's what I was feeling. That's what was going on. So I think that's another really important thing too. Not only does it help other people see that you can make it out of whatever that situation is good for us.
Yeah.
Also,
that's why 12-step programs emphasize constant thought of others and working with newcomers, because we see people who are where we were at, and we get to share our story with them, and it reminds us of who we really are.
Yeah.
And that we can get back to that, right?
Yeah.
It's about service to other people is really the big part of the 12 steps.
And then back to, one of the reasons that a lot of people might not want to share that stuff and not want to talk about it is that embarrassment.
Right.
You go into a meeting or in an outpatient program, or you're just with a group of people that are in recovery, and you start talking about some of the dumb things that you've done and some of the stuff that's happened to you, any bad decisions that you've made. Half the people in that room are gonna be like, yeah, I did that too.
Yeah.
Or I did, that or something worse. Or so it's I don't know, made me not feel as bad of a person as I felt like when I would talk about that, and other people would be like.
I always feel like I don't tell a lot of stupid things that I've done in life, because I've done some pretty good ones, but
sounds like you should start talking about them.
Yeah,
that's what this is all about.
Yeah, probably not on this program, but there was a time when I wasn't a cop, and anyway, so I really believe this talking about it is important, because it really lets people know that, again, nobody's perfect.
No.
And once we get our head out of this idea, and I think right now, one of our biggest pride to keep throwing it under the bus, but social media spends a lot of time making these kids think they have to be perfect. Yeah. I mean, they got all these, you can take your picture for girls, and they, what you see on Facebook posted, well, they have all these things that edit every blemish and little thing off their face, and everybody's expecting you to be perfect, and all your friends and peers and the world wants you to be like cosmopolitan. But at the end of the day, what it does is it creates this idea that we have to be perfect and nobody can meet that standard. Like, that's just way too high of a standard. So talking about, like, when we make mistakes is like, oh, I'm just another person. Mm-hmm. I'm part of the team. I'm not really abnormal. I might have went down a bad path that some people don't, but I'm just human. Like, I make mistakes and I can fix this.
Yeah. And honestly, I think owning it and sharing about it and really being comfortable, like radical honesty. If we're radically honest about ourselves, then people can't use it against us. It becomes part of our story.
Yeah.
And if, like, people always say, oh, do you mind, Nate, do you mind if I share your story? I'm like, my story's out there. It's out there to be used, and I'm not ashamed of who I was. Do I feel bad about things I did? Sure. Like, shame is I am something wrong. Guilt is I've done something wrong. Yes, I had guilt. Guilt is a healthy thing. You want to feel bad about it because it pushes you to do better. But I'm not ashamed anymore of my life and the way that I lived. Yeah. Because now I use it to help people, and I own what I did.
Yeah, and I would say for you and Tommy, the other great thing is, again, I've said this before, and I've said it in speeches or talks with anybody, is I'm a police officer in narcotics. Mm-hmm. So I can go talk to people that are ex-drug addicts, current drug addicts, and I can show them I really care about them, because I do.
Right.
Because they're my fellow human being. I've just always believed you're my fellow human being. I got to care about you. It's my job. But it's hard for them to relate to me because they're like, they see the symbol, right? The badge.
Sure.
And they're like, you're the dude's trying to put me in jail.
Right.
Whatever. I just got human beings do it all the time. We generalize people in groups, and that's just part of our human nature. We're not ever going to get away from that. But with you guys, you've kind of been you have been down in the trenches, and you did a bunch of stupid stuff, and you made a lot of mistakes, and you found a way out.
Right.
It's a lot easier to follow a leader that's been there and done that. That's like Crucible of Leadership 101. Well, okay, you tell me to do something, okay, but have you ever done it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, no, I honestly have never been with anything like this other than witnessed it from the outside.
Yeah.
And having you guys come out and talk to people is, I don't know, I just always thought it was pretty amazing that this even happened. And it's bigger than all of us, and I'm pretty happy for the fact that this is how it's went.
Well, and the thing about leadership too, there's a great book by Tony Dungy, Mentor Leader. And he talks about in the book that leaders they're gonna fill a void, right? Whether they're good or bad.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna step up.
Yep.
And it might as well be you, right? Somebody's gonna lead your family. Somebody's gonna lead your community. Somebody's gonna lead the people who are lost and broken and need someone to help them and lead them out. Why shouldn't it be you?
Right.
Because if it's not you, it's going to be somebody else, right? And you don't know what that person's motives are.
Right.
So if you work on that and you're honest and you're authentic and you take up that mantle of leadership, you can control the narrative, right? And then you can help people to a better path.
That's right.
So fill that void or somebody else will, right? And it's okay. And the thing about being a leader is good leaders are always questioning, am I a good leader?
Yeah, you should.
Right?
You should.
And, they talk a lot about, people always say this about courage. Courage is in the absence of fear. It's being fearful and doing it anyway.
Yes.
Right? Stepping up, not being afraid to fail. Failure is not really failure, honestly. Like if you do something and you don't do it right, I always say the only time you fail is when you quit trying, is when you give up.
That's it.
It's just a learning experience,
Yeah.
Everybody's going to make mistakes, especially in a leadership position. Leading people is not always an exact science. There's certain principles you can live by when you are a leader, but you're never going to be perfect, right?
Yeah, life's messy.
It is messy.
Yeah.
So is leadership. So is being honest with people. So is being an advocate. So is being out there with your story. And there's another thing I think a lot of people wrestle with that I think comes from our society, which is that notion that you shouldn't be uncomfortable. You shouldn't have anxiety. People talk about like their anxiety all the time. Talk about like panic attacks and I have anxiety or depression. This idea that you shouldn't have anxiety doesn't make any sense. Anxiety is what kept us alive as a species.
Correct.
You should be anxious about the fact you might not have enough food, right?
Yeah.
That's typically not where it comes from anymore, is that I might not be able to take down the saber-tooth tiger and kill it, but it's that I might get fired from my job.
Right.
Good. You should be worried about getting fired from your job. No, you should.
I agree.
That makes you a better.
I agree.
It makes you a better employee.
It does.
You should have anxiety about not being a good leader because that makes you be a good leader. Now, that doesn't automatically make you be a good leader. You can sit in your anxiety.
If you don't, though, where do you get the drive to try to do better?
If you don't what?
If you don't have that anxiety, where do you get the motivation or the drive to try to do better and improve yourself? If you're just so comfortable all the time, well, you don't have a reason to change anything.
That's
then
right.
You need to get outside yourself and you need to think about other people and think about all the people that depend on you. Everybody in their life is a leader one way or another, whether they realize it or not. Especially if you have a family. If you just have one kid, or even let's just basic. You have a spouse or just a significant other. Somebody else that depends on you to pay your half of the rent. Or even if you don't have a job, that you're the one that stays at home and you're the one that takes care of the yard, does the dishes, keeps up the house. That should be enough for you to have some kind of worry about, are you living up to your and their expectations, right? We all have people that depend on us.
Right.
And if you are a leader in a position where you have people whose livelihoods depend on you, you should be thinking about, those people don't just depend on me. Multiply each one of them by 4 or 5 because they've got kids at home, they've got a wife, they've got a husband, they've got community members, or maybe they have a sick parent. It's the same thing with recovery. Our recovery touches everybody around us, whether we believe it or not. You were talking earlier about all the people that you've helped get out, right? Of sex trafficking, of addiction, of bad choices in life, whether it's gang activity, whether it's, whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? The ripple effects of that are almost unimaginable. Whether you go to the light or the darkness, doesn't matter.
Right.
It's like an earthquake, right? anytime someone rises or falls, there's either going to be a positive result or a negative one, right? There's shock waves that go out.
Yeah.
So that's something to always consider too. What you do 110% matters. And here's the thing about doing those things that you need to do. It doesn't matter if you want to or need it. It just matters if you do it. We talk about that all the time with recovery, right?
Yep.
Dick Boggess told us that. He said that he told a guy once, recovery is not for people who want it or need it. It's just people that do it.
Yeah.
And that's just putting one foot in front of the other.
That's it.
And the thing I love about recovery is I always see there's so many parallels to life in recovery. The principles that you learn about in recovery translate over to almost every aspect of life. When you look at perseverance,
Yeah.
when you look at honesty, I mean, all those things are going to serve you well, getting off drugs and alcohol, staying off drugs and alcohol, but not only that, they're going to improve your life and the life of everyone around you.
Yeah, it forces you to take some kind of responsibility.
It does.
And sometimes when you're, like being an addict, you've got one responsibility: get more drugs.
Get more drugs.
That's it.
Whatever it takes.
And it doesn't matter what happens around you. Whereas you're kind of flipping that whole script inside out when you guys are coming out of that is okay, it's not about me really. Really, it's about all the stuff around. It is about me, but it's also a lot about what's going on around me.
Well, I want to say too, when I was in active addiction, and part of the reason I started using was because I hated responsibility. I hated having to do things that people told me I needed to do. Like when I was a kid, let's just say keep it small, things like being considerate of my grandparents, giving them a hug, telling them I love them, taking out the trash, being nice to my parents, going to school, doing my homework. I hated those types of things, right? Part of the reason I hated it though was because I thought I was going to fail. I looked at it as a burden. Like if I didn't have any responsibility, then there was no pressure, there was no anxiety.
Right.
What I started to realize when I got into recovery, responsibility is a privilege, not a burden.
Yeah.
It's a thing to be revered and respected, right?
Yeah.
Responsibility is a good thing.
It is.
It makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that a lot. And that's really what we're talking about here is all the bad things that have happened to us. You can either live in it and you can sit in it and you can talk about how you're triggered and you're traumatized. And a lot of times what those people do is they end up becoming part of the problem because they just sink into their selfishness, right?
Yeah.
And they don't think about anybody but how they feel. Or you can take it and you can be part of the solution. And that is infinitely better. You can be you can choose to be one of the bad guys or one of the good guys.
That's it. Or one of the guys that do nothing.
Right, which is almost just as, you might as well go be a bad guy. If you're just going to sit there idly by, right? So, which is worse? If you're out robbing people and stealing from them as a cop, or if you know that other people are doing it, you just let it happen. You just don't care.
Right.
They're both bad.
Yeah, they're both bad. It is.
Especially because you have the power to do something.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Everybody watching this has the power to do something. It doesn't matter what you've been through.
Yeah, they like to be told a lot, I think, from the media and the news that you don't have any power and that the whole thing's too big. And, you should just give up and go home and, roll up in your bed with a box of ho-hos and a beer and call it a day. And it's not really what should happen. I think that's how we got to where we are right now in society is we just all started just paying attention to ourselves.
We did.
Yeah.
And we also want to outsource responsibility.
Always.
Right? People talk about they hate cops because you guys are brutes and you guys use force to make sure the laws are being followed. But at the end of the day, when they're in trouble, who do they call?
Always.
Because what don't they want to do?
Deal with it themselves.
They want to outsource it to you.
They're going to outsource it to me.
So instead of learning how to do it themselves, they're like, I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in violence. Well, somebody breaks into your house at 2 a.m. with a shotgun.
Yep.
And they say they're going to kill you and your family.
But
they're not really a pacifist. Yeah, they really they're a pass office is what they are. They're going to pass it off to you is what they're trying to do.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, not always, because the media this is another thing we got to be careful with. When this really started happening with the police, not to get off topic too far, but just to cover what you're saying is there are, again, you don't get to hear from the really good people.
You don't.
The media, the media sometimes to me is kind of like my job in a way where I deal with people in crisis and people having a bad day. 90% of the people I deal with are not having a good day. That's just the basis of it. That's every police officer. We're not getting called for, sunshine and cupcakes. Right. So we start to think like we have no control over this. But again, it's really, we have all the control.
You do.
You've just allowed yourself to be told that you don't.
Well, I mean, I think the control that you have is how you respond. And I think that for you as an officer, it's like you get to be the person that shows up on somebody's worst day.
Yeah.
And you get to be part of the solution.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Right.
Hopefully.
Well, there's going to be a solution one way or another. Might not be the one they want.
Right.
But you can do your best as an officer to help people find a good way, positive way out of it. Yeah. Right. And I think that's the control that you have. And the control that we have is showing up on somebody else's worst day, as far as their families called us there to talk to them about recovery. They don't want to do recovery. All we can do is share with them our story in an honest way and hope that they take that and they also want to join us in part of the solution.
And if not today, maybe tomorrow.
We'll try again tomorrow.
Or a year from now.
100%.
Yep.
I do think that is I feel like that's my responsibility. I know that you feel like that's your responsibility too. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. I don't think it would be fair for us or anyone who's made it through something like that to just keep it to yourself and not try to use it to at least help one person. I mean, you can't use it to try to help one person, then I don't know what the hell you're doing.
Well, and here's the thing too, a lot of people in recovery...
Talk about being selfish.
Well, yeah, exactly. And a lot of people in recovery, talk about trauma-informed care, which is awesome. But, a lot of people I hear is like, well, I can't do that because I'm triggered. You don't think that us going to a dirty motel is triggering? You don't think that us going to a house where there's drugs everywhere, there's booze everywhere isn't triggering? You don't think sometimes we're not scared going into a situation where we have no idea what's going on? The time that I had to go walk through the economy and to look for somebody, you don't think I wasn't worried that somebody might try to rob me or pull a gun on me? I've been in there before. People have gotten shot in the economy just hanging out there because there was a gunfight going on. They had no idea.
That's true.
I put my hood up and I went in there anyway and I did it. If you're triggered by something or you're afraid or, it gives you some kind of visceral response, then that is an indication that's something you need to lean into.
Yeah, good. Do something about it.
Don't be afraid. Exactly. It's like Conor McGregor says, do something about it. Do something about it. But he's right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. About that, he's right. I don't know about much else.
Right. But. Yeah, okay. Well, he's a controversial figure, but even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. So we'll give him that one.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, I mean, that really today was what I want to talk about, was leaning into our story, not being afraid, deciding we're going to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Responsibility is a gift. I mean, a lot of people out there have been through horrible, awful things. But if you just let it stop there and let them stop at horrible, awful things and don't turn them into a story that can be a good thing to help somebody else, you're missing a huge opportunity. Not only for other people. So one of the reasons, like we were talking about, that the 12-step programs talk about helping others is because it actually helps us too.
Yeah.
Because we feel better. We turn all those terrible, awful things we do to our families, to our society, into something that can help another person be restored.
I think the simple fact of knowing that I have ever been able to help anybody do anything made me feel way better than I ever thought I would.
100%.
It's purpose.
Well, I think
it's having a purpose.
It is. And I think one of the best examples that I could highlight, obviously, is, you and Sergeant Gerardot, but also Teresa Julie-Rat, who is with JAVA, Justice Accountability Victims Advocacy, and she lost her son to a fentanyl poisoning back in 2020.
Yep.
And ever since then, she has been a huge advocate to helping families with prevention, so preventing people from using fentanyl and passing away from it, but also rallying around people who have lost their children, right? And calling for justice. And if you find her on Facebook, Teresa Garcia Julie-Rat is her name on Facebook. She has so much positivity coming out of her Facebook page. She's always posting inspirational quotes, always posting about purpose. She took one of the most awful things. I don't have children, so I don't understand, but I've heard parents tell me before, and I'm sure as a parent you would say this, you couldn't even imagine losing one of your kids.
No.
Especially to something so senseless, right?
Right.
That shouldn't have happened. And she's taken that, and she could have been angry, and she could have been bitter, and maybe for a time she was. but she decided people need to hear my story. I'm not ashamed. I want to do what I can to help other people. And one of the ways that I found that to be true in my own story was I used to hate going to funerals for people that died of this disease because it made me sick to my stomach because, you know, after a while you get tired of seeing dead bodies, right? And you get tired of crying families, and not because of anything to do with them, but because it's hard on your heart and your soul.
It is.
And it's hard on your psyche. And then you go to bed at night, you dream about it, right? And I was at a funeral one day, a viewing for a young lady who had passed away, and almost a year to the day, her brother had passed away from a fentanyl poisoning. So both this family had lost 2 children. Okay. And I didn't know anybody except the guy who ran the funeral home, Mark Scheit, Fairhaven, and he invited me out because he said the family needs to talk to somebody. I was like, well, who am I? Like, what am I going to tell them? I haven't lost somebody. I've lost friends and family members. I've never lost a child. So he said, it doesn't matter. They want you there. I said, okay, I'll be there. I was there, and they had me come up and stand in front of the casket, and they talked to me for probably 20, 30 minutes. And in that moment, they could share with me all the gritty details that they had been through, all the stuff that their daughter had done, all the concerning nights, all the things that she did that weren't her, all the good memories, and they knew in that moment that I didn't judge them.
Yeah.
That I could just stand there and say, I understand. And I don't think any less of her because of what you just told me.
Right.
And in that moment, I realized, wow, going to all these funerals and being there for these people and going through what I went through, I can use this for good. And just being there for people and being able to nod my head and them knowing that I'm being genuine when I say, she sounds like she was a great person.
Yeah.
Who just got into a couple bad things.
Yeah. Sometimes we make mistakes that we can't come back from.
It's true. Mm-hmm. And then the sad part is people remember that, oh, that person died of a drug overdose.
Yeah.
But they weren't just a person that died of a drug overdose. One time they were a kindergartner, they're somebody's kid, they draw pictures, they had dreams, they wanted to be a firefighter, they wanted to be a nurse, they wanted to be a doctor, they wanted to be a veterinarian. Yeah,
I've talked about this when we were doing human trafficking with my girls that might have worked at strip clubs and then become prostitutes.
Yeah.
They get trafficked or they're prostituting on, because they want to. Mm-hmm. But again, like I used to have this conversation with my fellow police officers. I'd been doing this for so long that I had to explain because we stopped thinking of them as people. We start thinking of them, they're a prostitute.
Right.
And I'm like, do you think that somebody's 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old girl said, I hope I grow up and become a human trafficked prostitute hooked on drugs and alcohol?
No.
And I'm like, no, because something bad happened to them. They sustained some kind of trauma and they're trying to cope. And then once you get on that path, I can't hold normal jobs. Mm-mm. I've just got to have cash and I've got to have it now. Mm-hmm. This is a way to get cash. Mm-hmm. And again, human beings that we should care about and not just throw into a category and say, oh, well, you're just a drug addict or you're just a prostitute or you're just a whatever. Mm-hmm. Maybe we try to do our best, and it's not always going to work, but we try to do our best to find the good in them and see if we can get that back.
100%. And then sometimes the best people to reach them once they're out is people that have been through it themselves.
Correct. 100%. Right?
And that's what we're talking about here is no matter what you've been through or what you've done, if you think it's horrible, disgusting, shameful, painful, there's somebody out there that needs to hear it.
Yep, it's true.
That you went through it, you made it out, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can use it for good.
Yep.
You don't have to let your story put you in a box.
Yeah. That's it.
I think that's a huge part of recovery. And we talk about recovery a lot from drugs and alcohol, but there's recovery from everything.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? Everybody's in a form of recovery from something.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure you would probably say you're in a form of recovery from anything.
Yeah.
Being cynical, right? You shared with me at one time that you were cynical for a little while as a cop because you just saw so much crap.
Yeah, it starts to wear you down.
It does.
It's hard to take a lot of bad and turn it into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as much as I hate to interrupt this conversation because I know we could sit here and talk all day, it has been about 45 minutes.
All right.
So we'll have to have you back on again.
Absolutely.
Anytime. I like being on.
Heck yeah.
Any last words or thoughts either of you have?
I mean, there's always something you can do to help somebody else. I mean, just start there. Nobody's gonna go from being, addicted to drugs or being sex trafficked or, living, a life of gang activity to being, Superman and saving the world. But start small. Seek somebody out who can help you, and go from there. It's a tough path, but you keep one foot in front of the other and be okay.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us again. We'll
Anytime.
definitely have you back. And thank you all for listening, watching, sharing the show. We definitely appreciate it. And we will be back in probably a couple weeks.
That's right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.